Today we're going to go deep into Horizon. We are going to talk about Horizon today as it is already released in the 1.5 version. It was released in June.
Hey, who the heck are you?
Do what?
Who are you? You didn't introduce yourself.
Okay, in case you didn't hear me, I'm Andrew Johnson. I'm a staff architect in our end-user computing division at VMware. We are going to go into Horizon 1.5. We're then going to dive into Horizon tomorrow, or Horizon Suite, as you guys saw unveiled yesterday in the keynote. And then I will go through and do a quick end-user demo for you guys, and then we'll open up to Q&A afterwards. And with that,
all right, I'm Jared Cook. I'm some sort of architect in advanced development at VMware here in end-user compute, focused mainly on integrations. So we'll do the typical disclaimer slide. I can change anything after the fact once we present it, right? We all agree with that. And like Andrew said, we're going to walk through the today pieces. We're going to go through what's in there tomorrow, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end, as well as a demo apparently, which we did not do yesterday, so you guys are in luck. So really what we want to start is we want to start by talking about what were we doing? What is Horizon? And we're going to give you a brief cursory overview as to the thinking here so that we can all agree on some terms and then we can move it forward. And then before we dive into the deeper sections of the technical pieces. So really, when we talk about Horizon, we go back in time a little bit to where we started as far as what problem are you trying to solve, right? So the whole problem here is kind of a fundamental shift in the market, or what we feel is a fundamental shift in the market, changing from managing devices to really managing users, right? And that's identity. So the identity has really changed from getting applications down to device to actually getting them to the people that use them, because it's people who use them. That's what you saw yesterday in Steve's keynote. So we think about the past in terms of there was a desk that you went to, that you worked at, and it was easy to manage. So all that, what we call context, was defined for the IT admin. That, in fact, was the past. That is over. And users are really pushing into what we're trying to do now, right? They're forcing you to make some decisions from your side, saying we want these devices, we want applications, that we want them from these different places, such as SaaS, such as mobile apps, etc. And we want them all of the time. Some of these you don't have any control over from an IT perspective, but you still need to manage it, right? And you want to make sure that it's secure and be able to pull back in all the information that you need to have to do things like be compliant and all of those other regulatory pieces that we need, as well as ensure a end-user experience, right? Because ultimately, even if they bought it themselves, they're going to call you if it doesn't work right. So that's over. We enter something called the PostPC Era. To be super clear on this is not non-Windows, right? This isn't the death of Windows or anything like that. Windows is still a part of this. It's just not the center part. For a long time, we've looked at it as the only mechanism in which we're placing objects on, such as files and applications. But as we move into this new space, and we still have to deal with the old space, we have to have some other pieces that we're looking at to be able to manage this, right? So we need to do things like broker services and get VDI-type desktops down there, and those runtimes need to be managed appropriately, right? So Windows doesn't go away, but where does the change come? The change really comes, and you look at this as far as a cutover, and this is what we mean by post-PC. When we move from having a dominant area, such as a browser or an OS, like Windows or IE, in the environment where all the applications are written for it, into a place where we actually hit that crossover point that no longer does it matter. We're building those apps so that they're cross-platform, they're not browser-specific, etc. So when does that crossover point occur? And actually, in reality, where we see it occur is in 2011. So we've actually already crossed it. This is a reality many of you have already been dealing with and understanding, right? So there's nothing new here. One thing to say is that line, if we follow all those lines out to 2020 and way beyond, Windows applications, browser-specific applications don't go away. They just become less and less and less. And it's essentially a very long tail that we're looking at there. So we still need to maintain the relationships to be able to manage those, but we have to come up with new relationships to manage all these new spaces as they're coming up. Kind of to define that, to take a look at it, this is the spaghetti slide, right? And really what we're defining here is all of the work that you've done over the years to be able to deliver the things that you're trying to get out to end users. We think of Windows as the physical desktop. We think of legacy apps as applications that only run on Windows or are actual OS specific. You have to come up with a mechanism. Many of us came up with mechanisms that were wrapped around the device itself and delivering those services out. The same started to occur when we went to the Mac, right? There wasn't particular things that were built necessarily for the Mac in the beginning, although they were coming into the environment. So we started looking at things like SaaS to deliver some of those experiences. And it continued, right? This is all, every line here represents some work or some product that you had to buy to be able to do this. And it becomes very confusing and really time intensive as far as maintaining, as well as expensive to run. So you continue to have to build and train people on all of these things to actually get it in there. This is really where we see and where we started building products, right? This is where Horizon started, is trying to solve this problem and making a shift from managing devices and actually managing users and treating that identity as something that we could push to, and realizing that we may not have everything that's on the device may not belong to us. So there was at the time, a shift towards, and we're already in it, a shift towards bring your own device and devices that the company didn't own, and we were actually trying to get those services out to. So Horizon's approach really is a manage in the middle approach, right? It's the idea of having a universal broker of brokers, if you will. So a single choke point to which you could get all of your IT pieces, as well as all your end user objects back together. So easy for the end user, having a workspace to go to, as well as easy for the admin, having a place to control all those tools in the background, all those different architectures. And in fact, a place for us as a software company to start building controls for all of those pieces to pull them in. So we're going to go through all the offerings we have in this space, and then we'll talk about some of the other stuff we're doing. So where are we today? Today, we really started with our first launch of Horizon as a hosted service in 2011, focused on what I think may be one of the harder things to do, which is dealing with the SaaS problem that was occurring. Because SaaS really wraps around having to control the identity and trying to give you controls into properties that you don't have necessary control of, right? It's outside of your data center, it's in the cloud, and you don't really have much more to it than just the ability to actually sign into it. So you go blind at the firewall. You have no controls, you have no risk, you can't do any of your assessments appropriately, right? So that's where we started solving the problem and coming up with ways through standards-based mechanisms to kind of facilitate those controls and give those controls back to you. That was first released in the hosted service. In the fall of 2011, we moved it forward and we actually implemented the ability to manage and deliver ThinApp applications. So virtualized applications out through the Horizon tool. So thereby getting the workspace so that it was much more robust for your end users, right? They had the ability for web and SaaS applications as well as now Windows applications to be put into that workspace to be used and controlled through policy. Then we did a bit more work, and one of the things that we heard from you guys was that that's great, but I don't want a SaaS application to manage my SaaS applications, so we'd really like it if we could get that on-prem, right? So there we spent some work, and we basically took the code base that was sitting in the hosted environment and made that into an on-prem offering without removing any of the functionality from our service to something that you could use as a service, correct? And then we made that available, and that actually went to general availability in the summer, so in June of this year. And that's where we're really going to start here. So we're going to start by talking about what was in that June release, what actually builds up all of that environment, and then we'll talk about how we actually move that to the next thing that you saw, which is the Horizon Suite.
Thanks, Jared. So the Horizon solution is comprised of two virtual appliances, a Horizon service and a Horizon connector. The Horizon service is how end users will consume the apps, and administrators will assign policy. The connector sits in the middle and basically takes any internal resources and sends metadata up to the service so that you can then assign policy. With that, the connector will tie into things like user directory stores, Active Directory, ThinApp repositories, other SaaS and web applications that maybe support SAML, OAuth, etc. This slide here is really up just so that when you guys get the slide deck, you can understand the different components that make up Horizon Application Manager. The one takeaway I want you to take are user roles. So there are 3 types of users inside of Horizon. There's a Horizon administrator, who basically, again, assigns those policies. There's the end user, who will use the applications that you assign to them. And then you have what we call an operator role, which is basically a super admin. He gets in and creates your Horizon organizations that your users can log into. So it is possible to have more than one organization underneath Horizon. The Horizon Service Appliance itself, they're very lightweight virtual appliances. 1 virtual CPU and 4 gig RAM will support 100,000 users. So as soon as you start introducing a second, third virtual appliances, you can see how well this scales. The reason it scales completely different than what our View solution would do, which is 10,000 per pod, is because we're not doing any protocol work. We're just doing some policy, authentication, entitlement, etc. So we can fit much more users onto the appliances. Again, the connectors appliance, his main job is, again, to basically sync your users in groups that they're entitled to Horizon. The connector supports 30,000 users per virtual appliance. You can put in as many as you need to, and that also goes as far as different ways that your end users will get into the environment. So internal users may hit one connector versus external users hitting another connector. We do support certain 2-factor authentication models like RSA, and the connectors is your entry point into those solutions. High availability and load balancing. So we do not have any native load balancing into the product today. So you will have to set it behind your existing load balancers and your infrastructure. But for high availability, we do support what we cloning and clustering of the service appliances. The reason we would recommend cloning the appliances and then reconfiguring the name and the IP is because you're actually taking over the certificates, the encryption keys, and everything else that makes up the identity pieces of the Horizon solution. And then, of course, once you start scaling out multiple appliances, you're going to need an external database. So today, for your external database needs, we support our vFabric Postgres or any type of Postgres database, and then we will be extending that to other platforms, other types of databases in the future. I apologize. We were going to have a spotlight on our own internal VMware deployment, but we decided to, after yesterday's session, to change that for the actual demo. So if you'll bear with me for a second, I'm going to browse through a couple of slides here. And then I'll hand it back to Jared to talk about Horizon Suite.
Cool. All right. So really we wanted to start with that because the functional components don't change as we go into the suite. So this is building blocks here, right? So when we talk about the scalability of the connector and the service and how they interoperate, that's not changing necessarily as we move into the Horizon Suite. I think the things to take away here is these VAs are very, very small, right? In comparison to a lot of other solutions that are out there in market around some of the stuff that we're trying to accomplish with them. So we're, as Drew said, really, the service at 100,000 users is really 2 virtual CPUs, 4 gigs of RAM, and about 64 gigs of storage. And that storage is wrapped up in the Postgres database. And that database holds all the metadata around entitlements, policy, et cetera, right? So it can grow as you grow larger, but that's really kind of a loaded system there with those 100,000 users. So knowing all of that and moving into the tomorrow slide, we move into my beautiful architecture slide. Yeah. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to stick with the same format as the original architecture slide so that we could kind of draw some parallels here as to how it's constructed as well as what we support, right? So if you look backwards into what we were supporting, really around SaaS, web, and thin apps, we move into other application types, other service types here. So if you were at the keynote yesterday, then you heard us talk about things like Horizon Data, the movement of Project Octopus actually into the Horizon Suite going forward. We won in that naming committee, so Horizon got in front of everything. It was really cool. So Octopus became Horizon Data. And one of the things that we wanted to show you is that as we enabled these new services, we continued to carve apart all of the functional components into their own virtual appliances. So they maintain being very small, but we allow you, and we did that so that you can actually take that and carve this up as appropriate in your own environment, because not every environment's the same, so we can't have everything live in the same place because it's never going to work for everybody, right? So we broke them out so that there wasn't one massive server that you had to install, but in fact smaller subcomponents for each representing each service. So if you don't use it, it doesn't need to be there, right? We maintain keeping them at that small level, and we maintain keeping them on a Linux virtual appliance as opposed to requiring to go get Windows servers licenses, right? It's part of the solution. Doing all of that, we quickly realized that it might be hard to configure all of those pieces in a timely manner so that you could get, is that me bumping my own mic? Perfect. So in a timely manner so that you could actually get this up, get it, get a feel for it, get it into pilot, etc. So that was really a design goal we had going into this, that if you couldn't set up the solution in 4 hours, then it probably wasn't worth doing, and you probably would get frustrated, and then you'd call us, and I'd have to fly out to wherever you are and help you out, and I don't want that many frequent flyer miles, so we stayed away from that. And what we did is we actually constructed this as a virtual a VApp inside of our own infrastructure, so that you could actually download the whole thing, be able to use it, and when beta comes out, you'll be able to use this as a VApp. And when you deploy it, the one interesting thing happens here that you can take away. We introduced something called the Configurator VM, which sounds kind of ominous, but it's not. It essentially is the first VA that spins up as the VApp starts. This VA is responsible for all the other VAs, for all those other virtual appliances, to spin them up. So essentially when you go through the wizard, and we have one central wizard to actually implement the whole thing, you make some determinations as to what features you'd like to install. You check those boxes. And then in fact, the Configurator VM will go ahead and spin up the appropriate VAs in your environment. You can scale them out, scale them up, do all of those things, but it is that central place to be able to maintain them. Another thing that we introduced here is that we were doing data, right? And one of the things with data that's a little unique is that unlike some of the other services, which are all around people you know, data you're probably going to want to share with other people that the organization does not know. So this is the idea in Dropbox of sharing a file externally, right? So they're not going to be in your metadata. They're not going to be in your database. You're not necessarily going to manage them the same way. So we implemented what we call the Gateway VA. And the Gateway VA, in fact, is that point of entry for shared files to external entities, which we've called virtual users, so that we can maintain a list of where people are and who has shared what files with whom outside of the actual environment, and still allowing you to gain access to that and still allowing them to get the file if it's appropriate. Okay? Some of this is all controlled through things like class of service. So there's a rich set of policies here that actually gets implemented as well. So if we go back to the earlier discussion where I started around identity, context, and policy, identity is the user, context is where are they, what's their authentication type, what OS did they come in on, what browser are they using, and then what networks are they sitting on? Is it the public internet? Is it my own LAN? Is it something else? And do I want to allow those types of things out there? And that's the policy piece, which is a ubiquitous policy that goes across all services and tags up to the user. So we give you points of control. Class of service in the data world is even another set of controls because, like I said, data is a little different. I might want to have situations where I give quotas, where I control what programs are able to open and edit files, and whether those files actually need some security further wrapped around them, like a PIN or a passcode. All of this is done inside of our policy set. You see some other pieces here, and I tried to denote all the things we support, from VDI, mobile apps, SaaS apps, legacy apps, files, and that other thing, that published apps area. And we talk about this in terms of optional pieces on the side. So if you're, who in here is a ThinApp user? All right. I know, we're going to get some gold stars or something. InApp Factory, who's used that?
Way more than yesterday.
Way more. Great. So InApp Factory, you may or may not be aware, still doing the same function that it does, is in fact able to integrate directly into the Horizon architecture today. It's considered like the connector piece, right? That is an identity provider into the service. InApp Factory also has the mechanism in which it can be an identity provider for applications into that service catalog. So not having to do the same syncs, but able to post everything directly into the catalog. And that mechanism is already in it. So essentially it will connect in and just seamlessly integrate with the architecture. Did you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, why that's important is it gives you automation with InApp and Horizon now. So if you're not familiar with InApp Factory, what you basically can do with this guy is point it to a repository of, say, MSI files. InApp Factory will have some recipes on how to virtualize those MSIs and turn them into InApp packages. They then get deposited onto a CIFS or DFS share, which is then, like he said, connects up to Horizon Service and gives all that information out there. So and if you assign policy to users and groups to get these particular applications, it's an automated process for how you actually get ThinApps deployed to your end users.
Great. One thing I wanted to draw out here too for you is that when we talk about things like VDI as well, to like follow on to the ThinApp piece, we're not necessarily talking about replacing a VDI architecture or trying to encompass that in Horizon Suite. What we're talking about is the connection and the integration points into those architectures. So you see something over here called ThirdParty Connect, which is my quick marketing term for what some of those integration points will be and where they'll be housed from a VA perspective, right off to the side. This is to allow us to connect to those architectures, not necessarily replace them or take away any of the controls or granularity you have. So in the case of Vue as an example, we're not talking that we're going to become and somehow take the Vue architecture and it will be all encompassed here. We're talking we'll hook into it and pass the proper controls back and forth between the two solutions, as well as read in all the appropriate entitlement information, et cetera, into the solution without having to do more work. The whole idea being that we would fail if we were creating more work for you when we're trying to take work and put it in one place for you, right? To take those controls.
Specific to the Vue pieces, when we actually pull the information in, we will also pull entitlements and the pools that you are entitled to, so that you do not have to double set up users in Horizon once they've already been set up in VMware Vue. We'll simply make sure, as long as you have the same groups and OUs synced, then we'll just make sure those policies come right in, no extra work.
So one thing I wanted to show you, we talked about it briefly, it was in terms of the configurator VM, is just kind of the screen. So this is an actual screenshot out of my environment as I was going through setting up some of the alpha code for the keynote. And just to give you kind of a sense for what this might look like. And we tried to take everything that you would configure in the environment, from security to entitlements, the features you're turning on, or the services that you're maintaining, and pull those in. So this is actually a real screen. I got a lot of questions yesterday. Is that a mock-up? And no, this one's real, out of the environment. And as well as database. So the whole thing basically truncating what you have to do and pulling it into that one place. This is another, this is not a mock-up, although I'll comment on why you might think it is. This is also a dashboard out of the environment. So pulling those services into one place, being able to look at the services enabled. The first thing that everybody says when they see this screen, including me, is I don't think it's real because I never have seen 742 view pools in any one place. So those were placeholders, essentially, by product dev when we were doing this. Those numbers, in the end, will be linked directly to what's in the environment. That's just where we are in alpha, so that it looks interesting, as opposed to non-interesting, because there'd be 0 in our actual test environment. So, disclaimer there. But go back for 1 second. This is the idea, is that this dashboarding comes in and has a quick view into the information that's there, and a quick view into what's not enabled. So you can see in this environment we hadn't enabled mobile management yet, so it's showing up as not enabled. If we wanted to enable it, we would check it here, go ahead and enable it, and that configurator VA would come back into play and go ahead and start a new virtual appliance to actually do those functions. So it's that super quick view into the environment. And you see up here the number 12, maybe Next to settings, these are notifications that are going on and popping up. So we kind of have an idea of where things are happening in the environment that we may care about. So those are other things that we're building in.
All right, I'm going to take you through some of the types of resources that Horizon Suite will support. As we mentioned earlier, we introduced SaaS back in May of 2011. ThinApp came in November of 2011, and on-prem came last June. With that, of course, we're still going to support what we already have out there. So SaaS application, web applications, ThinApp applications are already there. Some more of the services that we brought in were mobile apps, for instance. And I know that we talked about in the keynote yesterday both the virtualization piece that goes inside of Android, as well as the iOS containerization, if that's a word, for iOS and iPhones and iPads. Those are supported solutions inside here, but we also have the ability that if you're not using that solution, that you can also manage apps and actually pull people through the Google App Store and the Apple App Store and actually entitle applications that way as well. So it's important to note there are more than one way to handle the mobile management pieces. Next up is the View desktops. We kind of talked about that briefly already. We basically can integrate with View. And then we have data services, which we talked about, setting up class of services and setting up different policies per type of end user that you have out there. Task workers won't need as big a quota as executives would, et cetera. And then the third part is other types of services, as we mentioned. You guys saw the icons up there where we can handle published applications. We'll have some questions later on about what you guys would also like to see, and we'll do a show of hands kind of voting poll when we get there. But those are the types of resources that are in the catalog. I'll let you take entitlement.
All right. Cool. So all those resources, it's great to have them there. I think the problem then becomes applying the policy to those resources, right? Being able to entitle users to them appropriately. One of the things that we think of in this space is we've got this catalog, as Andrew said, that you can give to them. But the next piece to that is well, what happens if they actually want something from you that you didn't originally give to them? How does approvals, how does workflow come into this? And how do we manage that whole process all the way through? I think the important note here is that one of the things that we implemented both in Horizon 1.5 and then are moving forward into the Horizon Suite is that we implemented the RabbitMQ message bus into the system or into the product so that we have the ability to actually drop messages onto that as well as read them back off it. So if you have traditional service management type tools or workflow tools, think VC Orchestrator, think Remedy, then there's an ability here to be able to actually, when a user requests something, push that onto the message bus and then put it into that tool. So it doesn't necessarily mean a rip and replace of tools you've spent a lot of time and frankly quite a bit of money implementing. You can reuse those still with providing this broker of broker type services and those control points as well as an end user workspace, right? So here it's all about the extensibility to be able to go out to those systems as well as in the system and from our side keeping it super easy for you guys to be able to manage those entitlements both through groups and users, whether they be AD groups or groups you've constructed inside of the tool based on some of the metadata that you've collected or you've pushed up to the tool from those disparate systems. One of the things here, this is where I got my mock-up question yesterday. One of the things here to look at is that inside of the tool itself, we also spent some time working on reporting and analytics. So when we think about reporting, we really and analytics, frankly, we think about all the information that we've controlled as well as all the information that we've collected about the resources that we're managing and the identities we're managing them for. So all of that is very auditable, very trackable, and put someplace. The next step to that, outside of in 1.5, we just did all the tracking, was to actually implement something where you could have a robust set of reports, a robust way of working with those, as well as some analytics as to what's going on to the system. So interesting things start to occur here when we think about the information we've collected and the numbers of services we're trying to manage. Because now we're managing services that are above and beyond and sometimes out to the side of when we think about mobile applications, think about third-party I don't know, published applications or something like that. We want to be able to pull that information back into it so that we actually have, and you have, a way of managing it appropriately and seeing some of the trending data that actually comes out of that, to be able to make intelligent decisions on where you spend money on your architecture and what you facilitate for your end users. So this is really what reporting and analytics is all about. Let me go ahead and answer the question. That is a mock-up slide. If we didn't mock it, it will be there in the tool. If we didn't mock it up, I wouldn't have very many interesting things to put on the slide, and I like bars and graphs, so they're there. Thanks, UI team. So this is just another way of interacting with the tool from an admin perspective to help draw out some of the parallels that you're seeing. Really, that is the, let me do the shameless plug for our booth staff. We're going to do a demo right now. We're going to handle some Q&A. We had lots of Q&A yesterday, so we wanted to leave plenty of time to ask questions about what the heck we're doing with XenApp. All those things you might have questions about, feel free to ask them. Just we'd ask you to go up to a mic so everybody can hear the question. We're also going to go through a live demo here. Andrew tells me. I didn't know that, but he tells me we're going to. And then as well as at the booth on the floor, we're running live demos on Horizon Suite all the time, so feel free to come on down. So we're going to jump into the demo, and as you have questions, just come up to the mics.
All right, guys, just to set the stage, we do have an alpha deployment of Horizon set up in our infrastructure back at the HQ. And basically what we're doing here is there will be native applications for different devices. And in this case, we're on an iPad, and as you see in the lower left-hand corner, we actually have the native Horizon app itself. Real quick, who here has played with the Octopus beta? Okay, so this will be the first time a lot of you guys will actually see the entry point of the client as well. So if we actually go into Horizon, I guess one other important note to make here is I don't like the word complex because it's actually pretty simple to get all this in there, but it is much more infrastructure than what you're traditionally used to when you're looking at our Horizon 1.5, for instance. As deep as that solution is, it really demos pretty fast. But basically what we have here is I've logged in as me. The first time you log in, you will be redirected to the connector to authenticate. Once you have that authentication token, we'll bring you back and you're able to get to your files and do everything that you need to do. So the first thing that does pop up is files, and especially with the newer versions, I have to find one I can actually pull up here, because this is live in data, by the way. For instance, this is a API doc that we have. But we do have preview inside of our files so that you can actually take a look here and figure out what you need to do. We're doing some really cool enhancements to this if you want to speak to that with Office files or whatnot. Did you want to?
Sure, you probably should choose another file.
I probably should choose another file.
API doc. Just saying. Sure. So on the back end of this, one of the things that goes on is the rendering of the document, right? So there's the native ability to open some of these files, but obviously when we talk about Office files in particular, there's lots of things going on in PowerPoints and Word docs that are formatted specifically using Office. So how do you make that look right when you're on iOS is the real question, right? Because you don't have Office available to you locally to actually render the documents appropriately. So what we've done on the back side of this is we've enabled the ability to actually have an Office server integrated into the solution so that when the document that is a complex document like an Office doc or DocX or PPT or something like that, on the back side of this, we can actually render it using that Office server to get you all of the rich viewing capabilities that you would be used to inside of the solution. So it's actually a kind of a slick integration there to keep the fidelity of everything appropriate.
Thank you. In addition to files, if you look down, I don't know if you guys can see, it's kind of low at the bottom there. By the way, the Wi-Fi is kind of crazy. So, but as you can see, the presentation did come up. And as you can see, there is everything. Down here next to files, we actually have applications. We'll actually show users how to get to their apps from here. We do have a couple of working apps here, so we can simply go into Zimbra email. Then we'll pass a SAML assertion over to get you logged in. And that's actually important to note as far as SAML goes, our SaaS app solution goes, is we also support user provisioning. So for instance, if you have a user that does not exist inside of the, in this case, Zimbra application yet, you can actually add this user to Active Directory, put them to a certain group, And then the first time that user goes to hit this, we'll actually go to Zimber and create that account for you. You don't have to actually do anything. We'll do the work behind the scenes. That's important because when you're using tools like maybe Salesforce or Google Apps, if you have someone that leaves the company, all you have to do is remove their permissions out of AD, and immediately they have no more rights to those pieces, those information that they had.
So who here knows what SAML is? Anybody know what SAML is? Cool. So SAML, just to explain for everybody, is basically a standard for federated SSO. So actually getting single sign-on federated from the application's perspective into the object you're trying to access it from. So it's a technology or a standard that we use and apply to. We use other standards-based ways of doing it, but this is a very useful in a SaaS environment where you actually want to be able, and this is what I said, we did some controls here for you, solving the SaaS problem, where essentially you can do a token exchange from the Horizon service to the SaaS application of your choice and actually get it so that these users, when they go to the SaaS application, will be redirected to Horizon for their authentication. As whether they go to the URL or come through the catalog, either which way, it doesn't matter. And we give them a SAML token that actually allows them to access the application. There is no real password they're using, which means that once you disable them in Active Directory, you actually disable them on all of those applications as well. So it actually gathers that back for you so that you get that control. You understand where everything is without having to go around and say, I don't know, did Bob use Google Docs? I don't know, right? And try to find out. And he's still been accessing those docs for weeks and weeks after you've let him go for stealing docs. So it's that control. So basically you flip the switch and all those applications come back to you. And each one of them is implemented slightly differently because of the way that they've actually implemented their application as to whether the docs come back to you, the account's eradicated. That's really on the SaaS vendor to do that. But we provide you those controls for the federated SSO portion, as well as for some of the vendors who support it, the just-in-time provisioning vehicle, right? So Google, for instance, Google Applications supports just-in-time provisioning. So basically, as Andrew said, you would add them to a group that's entitled to Google Apps, and the first time they click on it, it actually creates the account, does the token interchange, and they get their access to it. So you don't even have to manage the account on that side at all.
Great. And the last piece to show you is also the view integration pieces, so where we actually can tie into View. Now, this part still doesn't work, so I can't actually click one of these and launch a desktop. But you can get conceptually what it looks like to actually for your end users to be able to get to there. But ultimately, what would happen is they would select the pool that they're entitled to, and then we would launch the View client on the iPad in the back end, or the native application, whichever platform we're using, based on context.
So one thing to note is that it does work. Hey, it just doesn't work in our environment because we ran out of time. So those are actual real view pools sitting in the background that we have desktops actually in. They're being run on the show floor, et cetera. So they're picking it up directly from the integration. It just has to do that our client on this particular iPad does not have the correct version to do all the interchanges that we're doing. Because in a view scenario, we're actually using SAML as well to integrate with that. So we pass single sign-on information directly to the view desktop as you come in, so you're not going to re-sign in when you come through the solution.
If we have multiple view connection servers, and they have pools in those, will these only see the pools they're entitled to from all various servers?
Yes. Yeah, so the question was, if we have multiple view pools and connection servers, and they're entitled to multiples, will they only see the ones that they have access to? And the answer to that is yes.
So if we're using two-factor authentication, will it prompt for the secure token? Or will we already before it connects to the pool?
So you would actually do that up front. So there's two ways of looking at that. You would do it up front through the Horizon solution, right? So to even sign into Horizon, you would actually come through and give a token to get in before you ever saw that. So it's kind of integrated on that end in that scenario. And there was a question in the back.
Going back to your authentication model, can you speak about how you handle authentication for non-SAML-aware applications, which is the bulk of the applications that sit in our enterprise?
I've never heard of a non-SAML application. Just kidding. The question was, is non-SAML-aware applications? There's two ways to answer that question. I'm going to pick the most complex way to do it. All right? First off, just so we're all clear, SAML has been around for a long, long time now. When they have something called SAML primitives, And when we talk about web applications, we're really talking about the primitives that are doing the interception of that actual authentication, right? You can actually implement SAML primitives for most every platform that exists out there. I've actually not encountered a platform yet that doesn't have the primitive available to actually make it SAML aware. And we see that as a very long strategic vision, right? I mean, that's where most people want to be, is a federated SSO model. So you actually can take all your internal web applications and actually make them SAML aware. Yep, you can. I know you're shaking your head, but you can. Sure.
So in our product initially when we launched, we actually did have the notion of form fill, where a user could put their username and password in. We actually decided to pull that out because of this, how insecure that was. You had to maintain a database that had someone's password, which means it's hackable, and we didn't want any kind of, we didn't ever come back and bite us, right? So we decided to rip that out of the application for now, but that's not to say it won't come back in some form, fashion in the future, right?
Yeah, we recognize it. There's actually the three legs of the tripod, if you will, right? SAML is the most strategic. That's where everybody wants to be. OpenID is in there as another way to interact with the application. It's a little easier to integrate from an app dev perspective. That's something that we're actively looking at. And then the concept of form fill through browser helper objects is something that, you know, we have long conversations on. And it's certainly something we're thinking about to make it easier for you. We know it's hard, right? Or hardish. I mean, I can do it, but I don't know if everybody can.
Yes, sir.
So the question was, how about non-web applications, client-server applications? And you're talking about SSO there? We can't hear you up front.
Federated services don't work with client-server apps.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So I would think about, first off, we tried to handle the web services front end to that, because a lot of people have their own ESSO type platform they're using today. It's not to say that maybe as we look at this whole form fill thing that we hear is popular, we wouldn't be looking at that as something to solve as well at the same time. No, the implementation. The question was, do you need to have a federated server on the SaaS side as well? The answer is no, is that most of these SaaS applications in their security settings have SSO enablement there, and what they're looking for is a SAML token. So you do the interchange from our system to the SaaS application, and that's it, right? They're already enabled for that. So you can go ahead and do it. There's no requirement on their side for servers or services or anything like that. It's actually part of their application already.
In the scenario where you have multiple active directory forests, how does the connector work with that with Horizon?
So today, the question was, in the case of multiple Active Directory forests, how does the connector work in that situation? The answer is today we support the multi-domain single forest approach. And it really comes down to name collisions is the reason, right? Because in multiple forests, you can't necessarily say they're the same thing. You could do it through some unique mapping, but you'd have to figure out what those multiple forests were and why you're using them. No, we do not support trusts coming back in because we're doing a native read from either the global catalog or LDAP. What?
You spoke about data, and you talk about databases. Which one do you use? Do you pick up it to read them? How do you?
All right, so the question, I think, I couldn't hear all of it, so I'm taking a stab here, was the tools we used to actually build it out. We spoke about Linux, and we spoke about some things like maybe vFabric coming into it. What I would say is that we use Postgres, shamelessly because, well, we can do things that are interesting with it inside of App Director, right? From an HA and DR perspective, and that is entirely intentional. The virtual appliances themselves are all SUSE Linux-based virtual appliances, right? And then the vApp construct is a traditional vApp construct. So you can use, Cloud Director, or you could use just ESX or vCenter to actually deploy the whole thing. And those were some of the tools we used and just basically plugged it in. We didn't want to make a mismatch in the way that we did this as opposed to the way we do everything else. So we tried to stay very uniform there and open it up for enablement to be able to shift it around to, say, App Director as you want to get there.
Any other questions? All right, guys. Thank you very much for attending our session today.